UE has always been committed to social justice unionism, to unionism that's rooted in the community, and a unionism that's unafraid to militantly confront the powers that be when the situation calls for it. And I make those points because I think those points intersect with labor's responsibility to be part of the movement for police accountability.
How many shots?
16 shots!
How many shots?
16 shots!
16 shots and a cover-up!
16 shots and a cover-up! 16 shots and a cover-up!
Since the lack of police accountability has its greatest impact on working class communities, this is an issue that the labor movement cannot afford to avoid. And since the negative impacts cut deepest by far on working class communities of color, thus contributing to racial divisions in society, and since racial divisions have always been used as one of the greatest weapons to weaken labor unions, unions have an additional need, just from that practical point of view, an additional need to tackle this issue head on. And unions also need to take note that in times of real labor unrest, the police are called in to help suppress labor power, violently if necessary. So getting real community control of the sort that's being suggested here to help deal with the issue of what's happening to communities of color could also possibly help the labor movement, so that at times where that kind of labor protest takes place in the future, maybe it would make it a little bit harder for corporate forces to use police departments in that way to suppress labor.
I am declaring this to be an unlawful assembly, which has alarmed and disturbed others. You are disturbing the public peace without the authority of law.
Labor also has a special role to play in tackling this issue because, I think as has already been mentioned, the Chicago police, like most police forces in urban areas, are unionized and are therefore generally accepted as part of the labor movement. This contributes to hesitancy among much of the labor movement about criticizing the role of police in the community. Doesn't justify that hesitancy, but we have to recognize that it's there.
We're out here to assist the mayor in getting the message from the membership. Apparently he's failed to do it for the last couple of weeks. That's exhibited by the fact that he pulled the economic package off the table without us even negotiating the issues. The discord over the backing of the superintendent apparently has been dismissed by the mayor and the superintendent. Membership are out here today to make sure he gets the message this time around.
So the no confidence vote, he just pushed that off the table and ignored it?
Basically, the no confidence vote was dismissed by both the mayor and the superintendent. These members are out here today to make sure he receives that message one more time.
Where's the city council at with you?
City council, there's several city council members out here marching with us. Some city council members need to be re-educated as far as the collective bargaining process and not negotiating in the press instead of taking the road that they have taken.
So I think we need to look at the factors underlying this if we're going to find a way to engage the great bulk of the labor movement in the struggle to reduce police violence and abuses. So, starting with, police forces basically recruit working class kids. And many of them are literally the brothers and sisters of workers who are members of other unions, especially those in the building trades, higher paid factory work, and also a lot in the public sector. In addition, most unions these days do not find themselves confronting police power on the street when unions are acting as unions. Most labor pickets and protests today are done in a fashion where the police largely accommodate them rather than limit them, perhaps after some prior negotiation or whatever. But that's usually the end result, that once you're out on the street, the police seem to be working with you rather than against you for most labor-led events in the streets. Now, this is more a reflection of the non-militant state of the labor movement than it is of any desire of the police department, especially the higher ups, to help unions. But it still leaves many union leaders feeling like, you know, we get along with the cops all right, so maybe this isn't our issue. And so we have to recognize that that's an everyday experience. And we also have to recognize that in this recent period, with the attacks on public sector workers, there's actually been some actual unity around demands between the police and other public sector unions. You know, when you look at attacks on pensions, for example. And that's led, at times, I've seen it, I've experienced to some feeling of solidarity in the streets. I think those of you, and I bet most of you here, were part of at least one, if not more than one, of the big teacher unions marches through downtown during the strike. Noticed the banter and goodwill that was going back and forth between teachers and the police. The police who were blocking traffic for the protests rather than blocking protests to help the traffic, right? And you know, it's because they all had similar issues and they knew it. And so the police basically seemed to be letting the teachers shut down streets in the loop at will. Now, that may have been actually because there were higher ups who decided that, you know, there's so many people out there, we're not really going to stop them anyway. And just politically and with the broad community support, it was better to let them go. But again, it had that practical impact of leaving people feeling like, you know, this is another, that the police were being okay because police are union members also were facing the same attacks we are. And so there's a kinship there. That, I would argue, then turns around to a little bit of difficulty in getting some of those unions sometimes to realize, you know, that they still need to take a lead in challenging what's happening to the community on the street. Because the fact remains that the lack of police accountability is a great danger to working class people in general and the labor movement also. So we need to find ways to move unions on this issue. I would say the conversation probably needs to start with a recognition that the issue is less about individual police personnel, although there certainly are bad individual police personnel, but it's less about the individual police personnel and much more about a system that has been structured from the top to allow and even condone abusive behavior and the cover-ups that follow. So if we approach this as something from the top, not the bottom, I think we've got a better chance at moving forward on this and getting labor on board. And then we're also going to have to deal with the role of the FOP itself. And I know there are arguments that have been raging for a long time about whether police unions are truly working class institutions in the way that other unions are. And I'm certainly not weighing in one side or the other. All I'm going to say is most of the rest of the labor movement in this town recognizes the FOP as a union. And so we have to, that's a starting point for the discussion. We have to recognize that. And frankly, you know, I think folks see when the FOP strongly defends cops who are accused of wrongdoing, sometimes really bad wrongdoing, sometimes, as has been said, murder, right? We have to recognize that many unions see this as similar behavior as to what they're called upon to do, in fact, legally required to do when theirs is accused of having violated some rule or whatever else by management. It's their legal duty to defend them. But of course, most unions don't go very far in defending workers when the facts are clearly against them. And most unions don't stand in the public eye on matters of life and death when they're mounting their defenses. So there are some differences here, and we need to talk about that. So these are issues that need to be grappled with, possibly with serious discussions between other unions and the FOP, if we could get it to that point at some point, on how to draw a line between where proper defense of a member ends and overzealous behavior of totally unacceptable behavior starts. There's a line there somewhere, and we've got to find a way as a labor movement to help the FOP see it. So I don't pretend to have all the answers on how we move this conversation forward in the labor movement regarding police accountability. But I am convinced we can find some starting points rooted in the basic principles that I think we're all engaged in every day, the basic principles of class solidarity and justice, and try to go from there. And I'd certainly argue we have the obligation to make that effort to do it. It's too important an issue for us to stand on the sidelines and just hope for the best. Thank you.
I teach at College of DuPage out in the suburbs, and I wrote a book about the origin of the Chicago Police Department, which I think is why I'm here. So what I found in this book was quite interesting, which is that the police are a very new thing. Most people assume the police have been around forever. We need them because people are inherently evil. We all want to steal from each other. We want to beat each other up, and so we need the police to keep order. But if that had been true, we would have had the police for much longer than we had them. In the US, police come around in the 1840s, 1850s in Chicago. In England, the very first police departments aren't until really the 1820s. You had different kinds of forces that kept order before that protected the interests of different ruling classes, but they really looked different from the police. So what I was curious about is why were the police developed, when they were, and how did they come into being, who created them, and for what purposes? And the answer is actually pretty simple, which is that the economy really changed in that period. That was when the working class came into being. You had a capitalist class before that of a type, but it's when you first start to get industrial capitalism with lots of workers working on the railroads, working in various factories, working in the lumber yards in Chicago, working in the stockyards in Chicago. And these workers were often immigrants who did not fit into the previous ways of gaining social control. So it's out of all the tensions that flow from that you get the police. And of course, from the very early days, one of the first things the police did was break strikes. This starts as early as 1854, before the police are even formally formed, which is in 1855. You had like a pre-police. It's already breaking strikes. And every time one of these big strikes happened, well, the wealthy people of the city would come together. They'd figure out a way to raise more money for the police, to hire more police officers, to make the police more professional, to make them organized along more military lines, to give them a new ideology of order which would justify them to the population. And at other times, they tried to make them more legitimate, so they'd give them some useful tasks that people actually liked. One of them was preventing crime. One of them was finding lost children and taking them to their parents, or picking people up and taking them to the hospital, or finding the dead horses on the streets, which was a huge problem in Chicago at that time, and dealing with them. So it's not like the police did nothing useful for the population. But whenever push came to shove between workers and bosses, everybody knew whose side the police were going to be on.
Come on, brothers and sisters, let's go forward. Let's get moving. Go from here to the corner, Manhattan and Seymour. Take a left to receiving.
What about the rest of the town? You got paid to take care of our citizens, not to pay the rich people. You just care for the money, for the rich people. You don't care for the regular folks. They pay taxes every day.
What happened, Maggie?
Well, you see all the police officers are over here, how about Franklin? They're supposed to be taking care of them, not over here.
Now, between the 19th century and today, obviously a lot has changed, but some very fundamental things have stayed the same. And that's that when push comes to shove, the police still consistently side with employers and not with workers. And we've seen this time and again. Now, there's one huge thing which has changed since the 19th century, and that is the great migration of black people to Chicago. If you're talking about the Chicago police and other northern cities, a similar story. This starts in World War I, it accelerates after and during World War II, and that changes what the police do because now the police have a primary target, which is the black population. There's a couple of times when it seems like the police will side more with workers, and I'm sure that many ordinary police officers do feel more like part of the working class, and in fact come out of working class families, might have family members who are involved in various strikes or unions, and in fact they wind up in a union themselves. And so we see these moments in different places where it seems like the police break the mold. The most obvious is a Boston police strike in 1919, where police themselves go on strike. But this, I think, is actually a useful case to look at, because you see when the police go against their hierarchy, man, they get hammered. Because in that case, what happens is they all get fired, and they all get replaced, and the National Guard comes in right away as soon as the police go on strike. But the police still continue to smash heads when workers go on strike. In more recent-ish years, we saw this in Chicago with the Tribune strike. We saw it in the Detroit newspaper strike, which started in 1995, went all the way up to many, many years before they finally kind of gave up. And in each of these cases, in Decatur, we saw a similar thing where the police broke picket lines and pepper sprayed demonstrators in the Staley strike, and also intervened on the side of the companies in the Caterpillar strikes, which were going on at the same time. And so what we see over time is that the police consistently intervene on the side of the bosses. If workers and our unions accept the framework of the law as it exists today, after the New Deal, but also after Taft-Hartley, and after all the restrictions on the legal right to organize that have been put in place since then I think we have very few chances of actually organizing successful strikes. So why don't we see the police breaking picket lines now? Well, where are the picket lines to break? We see strikes going down to almost zero. And part of it is because I think the union leadership recognizes the law is really organized against us and it's hard to organize a successful strike. So they just don't do it. But if we keep going down that path, then we have no way out of the impasse the working class has got itself into.
Been on strike since July 18th at 8 p.m.
Do you think the strike is going well, or how do you feel about that?
I think it's going very well. I think the Tribune has lost a lot of advertising. I think they've lost a lot of circulation, and in the eyes of our international officers are going to lose a lot more.
There are times when workers have really tried to break the ability of companies to make profit. And when this happens, we can see that the police then often are called out in big numbers to really break that attempt. And one of the key pivotal moments in Chicago's more recent-ish history was in 1985 with the Tribune strike. And in this strike, you had mass picketing in front of the Tribune building. This is a really key part of Chicago's economy, and also, obviously, it produced a lot of the ideas that people read in the city. The unions, first of all, the Union of the Typographers was key to the Chicago workers' movement going all the way back 100 years before that. Everybody knew this, and the Tribune is really coming after them. So you got a big turnout from workers from all kinds of different unions in the city, mass picketing to block production and to block the paper from coming out, which would make it impossible for the Tribune to make money. So what happens? Well, the police break the picket lines. The police really are there to make sure that production continues, that the company can keep making its profit. The police were organized from the 19th century on as an institution with a very clear military-style hierarchy. You have officers in the police, you have the superintendent at the top, the mayor above the superintendent, you have captains, you have lieutenants, and as a police officer, you are supposed to follow orders. You don't have the right to say, oh, well, actually, you know, my brother is a worker for the Tribune and I support their strike. I'm sure that actually was true for some people. I'm sure there were police officers in 1985 in Chicago who didn't like breaking that picket line, but it doesn't matter. That's your job. You're a member of the police department. You are supposed to follow orders, and it's organized along military lines for a reason, so that these orders can come down from above. And of course, the other side of this is what the police do as individual officers on a day-to-day basis is deal with people as enemies. They have one tool to deal with the social problems they're supposed to solve, and that tool is violence. So you have a bunch of people who are counterposed to the population that they're dealing with every day. That's their job. And the only tool they have to deal with those people is violence. And they have a hierarchy which is linked directly to the big businesses. So when the businesses' interests are threatened, they have the capacity to order the police hierarchy, to get the police hierarchy to defend their interests. In fact, the law is written that way. That's what they're supposed to do. And the police are used to using violence, and they have a reason to do it, and they're ordered to do it. So this is what's going to happen. And I think that everybody in the labor movement needs to recognize this. We have a deep problem here with the police. Yes, many individual police officers might be our friends, even our family members. Yes, most people don't become cops because what they want to do is break strikes or break the heads of workers and unions. In fact, there are so few strikes now, most police officers probably barely even know what strikes are. That's not why people become a cop. But it doesn't matter, because that's what their job is anyway, and we have to be ready to deal with that problem as a labor movement. In mid-90s, in Decatur, Illinois, you had a lockout at the Staley Corporation. This is a major labor battle in the 90s. You had 3 strikes and lockouts going on at the same time, right in the same area. They called it the war zone, and it was a big turning point for the labor movement.
I think.
I did too, but the guy was down on the ground not doing a thing, and he sprayed him in the face.
Cops started pushing us, and then started shooting a mace at us, and he shot me right in the face, almost directly in the eyes from less than a foot away. It's been, I don't know how many minutes now, a half hour maybe even. I haven't even been able to see.
And once again, the local police of Decatur, this is Heartland, America, they attacked the workers with pepper spray, pepper sprayed workers, pepper sprayed their families, with the state police there too.
They sprayed you with pepper gas?
Yeah, in the face, in the eyes.
Are you see a little bit better? Has her eyes been flushed?
Yes.
Yeah.
We were standing there non-violent. We was not pushing the police. We was not in their face. And they sprayed mace on myself, my wife, and my children.
Were you up against the police?
No, we were not.
You were over to one side?
I was off to one side because of small children. And they sprayed mace on my children and my family. And we were not being violent. We was executing our right as a citizen to protest the atrocities the Staleys had put on the working people in Decatur.
How do you feel about the Decatur Police Department now?
I feel that they're being run by the city council, and I think that the city council is being run by ADM and Staleys. That's exactly what I feel.
So another major labor battle in the mid-90s, which was a huge negative turning point for the unions, was the Detroit newspaper strike, which started in '95. Again, it was an offensive against the workers. They were really forced out on strike by the companies. And in this case, the workers actually used all kinds of different inventive tactics. The workers were really determined. They tried to block production. They tried to take out newspaper boxes. They organized a big boycott of the papers. People all over Detroit had signs in their yards which said, "No Detroit News, no Detroit Free Press wanted here," which are the two major papers on strike. And the companies really lost a lot of money in the beginning of the strike. But when workers tried to stop production at their Sterling Heights plant, the cops, of course, sided with the company. And in this case, it was even more blatantly corrupt because the company had given the Sterling Heights Police Department something like $1 million, more than $1 million, to buy riot gear, for other kinds of things. Some Sterling Heights police officers were working as security guards for the company, as bodyguards for some of the executives of the company. A number of strikers were met with severe violence from police. A lot of them were arrested. And in this case, the role of the police in breaking the strike was very important. And it played a huge role in smashing this attempt by workers in Detroit to turn around the, by that time already, decade of concessions, more than a decade of concessions that the working class have been under.
We had about 200 caps and maybe another couple hundred reserves, probably just deputized, and they split the crowd up. And some people were beaten with clubs and broken ribs. The guy had a couple busted ribs and was wincing in pain, and the cops told him to get up and keep moving. He said, "I can't move."
Oh, he did on this side.
And at the same time, other people were being drug out into the center who were beat up, and one guy looked to be unconscious and wasn't moving anywhere, and they were just laying out in the middle, and we were dispersed.
So what you see here is a combination of different things. You see brute military force to make sure that the papers can keep operating and that they can get the things that they want into and out of the plant. Scabs can come in, papers can come out, material supplies can come in, the gates are going to stay open, and military force organized by the police is going to be used to do that. And strikers who try to block it are going to get arrested or are going to get beaten brutally by the police. And this happened repeatedly in the Detroit newspaper strike. On top of that, the legal niceties, even when they were on the side of the workers, which they were, it didn't matter, because the company could ignore it, and the company wasn't going to get beaten up brutally. We saw workers getting beaten. We did not see any executives get beaten by the police, even when the NLRB found against them. Well, this shouldn't surprise anybody. When's the last time we saw an executive of a major corporation get beaten up, do a perp walk, other than maybe the guy from the IMF, and have to face some serious jail time?
I can't believe none of y'all out here dragging us on the floor, dragging us on the cement. If this go through, and they gonna do the same thing to y'all.
You're
They
next.
gonna bring somebody in and pay them $4.50 an hour.
It's all gonna be private.
To get y'all the hell out.
Police.
And
That's
y'all
what they're
standing
doing.
here and harassing us. I hope you like the job. Who can look in the mirror? Can you look in the mirror? Can you look in the mirror?
I mean, in the long run, I think we have to get rid of capitalism. I think we have to get rid of a system set up to make a profit for a tiny layer of rich people who own everything, protected by military force on the backs of the rest of us. I think we have a society today which has plenty of wealth and technology to give everyone a decent life. But this society as it's organized today, with its laws, with its state apparatus, first of all the police, but also the military, the courts, the prison system, these things are set up to prevent that from happening.
You know, the cops are preventing us from, from any rights that we might have, that are left. Got to labor us. I mean, what can you do? And they're breaking up our picket lines, and people aren't going to take it.